In this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at subroutines, and in particular, we're going to look at a special type of subroutine called a function. A function is a subroutine that actually returns a result of some sort. And that idea of returning and the idea of result is something that some people struggle with. So I'm going to pick up where I left off in a previous tutorial, which was to make use of another function, or to make use of a function that's built into Turing. So I'm going to create a variable called x, which is real, and I'm going to create a variable called answer, which is real, and I'm going to put please enter a value for x, and then I'm going to get x, so I'm going to ask the user for their input, and then I'm going to put calculating the square root of, and in this case it's going to be x, so I'm going to put x there, and then I'm going to say my answer is equal to sqrt of x, and put the square root of x is answer. So nothing really ground shaking here except for the fact that I'm making use of one of the functions that's built into Turing. And the reason I'm starting with a built-in function is because, just to remind you, that a function returns a result. And because it returns a result, we have to store that result in a variable. So we can't just leave that sitting there on its own. If I just had square root of x on its own, that would cause that would cause an error. So I need to store the result in a variable. So if I run this simple little program, please enter a value for x. I'm going to say 5, and the square root of 5 is 2.236068. Just to show you that it's correct, how about I put in something a little more familiar, which is 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. So it's calculating the square root. So now I'm going to create a function. I'm going to create my own function. It's not even going to be as useful as the square root. It's going to be, I'm going to create a function that doubles any number that I give it. Now obviously I could do this just by multiplying by 2, but I'm trying to illustrate how to create a function. So in this case, I'm going to use the keyword function, and my function is going to be called double. I think double will work. I have to be careful though. I don't want to use a word that Turing has already defined. Now what am I going to pass to my value, or to my function double? What is the parameter I'm going to give it? I'm going to give it a number. So I'm just going to say num, and that's going to be a real. And then I have to specify what is this going to return. So the way I do that is on the outside of this bracket. So inside this bracket is where I put my parameters. And then outside of this bracket is where I specify what kind of value will it return. So I'm going to give it a real value, and it's going to return a real value. So what is this function going to do? It's going to have a result. What is the result of this function? It is simply 2 times the number that I give it, and double. And let's clean that up. So there's some formatting. And then down here, I'm going to have my main program. And in this case, what am I going to do? I'm going to keep these variables. I have a variable x, I have a variable answer. Please enter a value for x. And now, instead of calculating the square root, I am going to or let's say determining a value that is double x. So I'm going to find a value that's twice as big as that, and then I'm going to say a value that is double x is answer. So instead of having the square root of x, I'm going to double x. So you can see I didn't change things very much. The only difference is that now I'm making use of my own function called double. So let's go ahead and run this, see what it looks like. Enter a value for x, and I'm going to put in the value 5 again. And determine a value that is double 5. A value that is double 5 is 10. So that appeared to have worked. Let's check it again. Let's check it with a decimal value. How about 3.14, which is pi? Double of that is 6.28. So this seems to be working properly. So now let's go back and review this and deconstruct this a little bit again. So I declare my function using the keyword function. I give my function a name. I finish my function with the end and then the name of the function that I've given it. And then everything else in between this function and this end, that's what my function does. In this case, I've chosen to do something very simple. My result, that's the thing that is going to come back out of this this execution. So when I call the function double, result is what I'm going to get. So basically, it's as if I took this code, 2 times the number, and I put it right here. That's what result means. Result means I'm going to take whatever that value was. Now in this case, it wasn't a number, it was x. So that would be the same as having the code here, 2 times x. And we know that would work if I set answer equal to 2 times x. So that's essentially what this result command does. When the function is called, whatever's here beside result is what's going to go down here. Now you don't have to call the result right away. You could have other parts of your code. So I could have other useful code, and I could have more useful code. I could do a bunch of things in my function that may be required for me to reach this result. The function itself could actually be quite complicated. But in the end, I must give a result. If I'm doing a function, I must give my result, and my result can be a simple calculation like this, or it could just be a variable. Let me show you a variation on that using a variable. So I'm going to have a variable called answer, which is real. My answer is equal to 2 times num. And then I'm going to set my result equal to answer. Same thing, it's going to work the exact same way. 3.14, and I end up with a result of 6.28. So we can have multiple lines of code in our function, and we can return the results of a calculation, or we can return the actual calculation itself, depending on how I choose to write this. When you do this, write it for clarity. Write it so that you can modify it later if you have to. So that is a very simple example of a function. All this function does is it doubles the number. Turing has many functions built into it that you can look at as well as examples. There's things for taking the square root and the absolute value. A lot of mathematical functions. There are a lot of functions for manipulating strings. And you can, of course, create your own functions.